Well, I don't know all of you around this room, but I know many of you, and I can tell that a discussion on self-custody is not actually going to inform you guys all that much because you can know a lot about it. So we can talk about that. I'm happy to, but I thought a more interesting topic to talk about, maybe an uncomfortable topic to talk about. We've heard a lot of talks today about these different layer 2s and different approaches to how Bitcoin can scale. And to be honest, some of them make me a little bit uncomfortable as a Bitcoiner. And I don't think we really talk about this stuff much because there's kind of this overwhelming... Oh, Josef, welcome. Yeah. There he is. Yeah. So, Josef, I was just saying, I know a lot of faces around here, and we could talk about self-custody here today, but I don't think we're actually going to inform too many people about that. So I thought I'd at least start off with something a little bit different, a little bit maybe more interesting for us all to talk about. Yeah, so all of these layer 2s, right? We have this kind of overwhelming demand within the Bitcoin community that we must scale. We must scale, we must scale, we must scale. I'm not actually even sure that is the overwhelming need. Bitcoin layer 1 does work today, and lots of people got up onto the stage today and said, it's so expensive, it was 600 sats per VB. Well, yes, perhaps it was for 10 minutes, but then the fee rates came down again, and those people who could wait a bit, it was fine. It's kind of, I think, a little bit over complained about, perhaps. Are fee rates likely to go up again? Yes, they are likely to go up again. Are they likely to be volatile? Yes, I think so. But we have given up a lot of things in Bitcoin because of this demand to scale. And I'm just going to throw it out there that I don't necessarily think scaling is the be-all and end-all of everything that we should be thinking about. So that's the first thing I want to say. And then the second thing I want to say is there seems to be a erosion in the terms that we use as Bitcoiners. There used to be no debate around the fact that not your keys, not your coins. I'm seeing erosion in that term. Right now we have the sense, well, we can't all own a UTXO if we're at global level, so therefore we have to give up the idea of not your keys, not your coins. I'm like, okay, I'm not entirely comfortable with that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I understand that there are pros and cons. I know that there are, in many cases, not a better solution to that. But I think as Bitcoiners, we risk a great deal if we give up these ideals. The idea, we had this idea which was brought in the last few years of we would have this Uncle Jim. And Uncle Jim would be the guy who would run the Bitcoin node for a family unit or a local community or whatever, and people could then talk to his Bitcoin node and verify. And that was what an Uncle Jim meant. If you ask people today what an Uncle Jim means, it's the guy who custodies Bitcoin on behalf of the family unit. Do you see the difference between those two things? It's a very different thing. Now Uncle Jim is no longer just running a Bitcoin node. Now he's actually taking responsibility for other people's funds. And for me, that's an erosion in terms. We're seeing an erosion in terms in the definition of open source. Certain projects are becoming source viewable, right? We all know which one I mean. And they still call themselves open source. There is an erosion of terms in that system right there. I'm seeing this going on across the Bitcoin ecosystem, is that these high ideals that we had are being, and everyone's, it seems, is kind of buying into it. There's a few people who are saying, hold on, wait a minute, that's not what you meant. It's a bit of a change from what has happened in the past. If I look at something like Liquid, which is a very innovative system, and we heard about it earlier on the stage, I'm thinking, what happens further down the road of this federation? What happens if most of the world's wealth ends up in Liquid? At what pressure are those federated instances coming under then to censor transactions, to confiscate wealth. Where is the end point of that? Because we've seen in history what happens if you don't have a decentralized system. That's why we're all here, right? That's the reason that we're all here. And now we have a and people are saying, well, there are trade-offs. It's trade-offs. We have to scale, trade-offs. But where is the end road of those trade-offs? And if you think about those now, you might just end up aping into some system and all going along with it. And then later on, your kids ask you, how could you have done this? We had high ideals. Where did you lose the plot? Where did you lose it? So those are the kind of thoughts that I'm having today. I'm not saying I've got all the answers. I just know that if you start to drop your ideals and start to lose those things that make Bitcoin unique, you might be giving away the crown jewels. You might just be saying, whatever, let's just let it go. So that's kind of, a little piece. Josef, I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to chat to that.
Yeah. So Trezor has sold over 1 million devices in its history, over 10 years. Ledger has sold over 8 million devices, they claim. So that's a lot of people. And the fact is that as Bitcoin goes like mainstream, or at least touching people that were not like cypherpunks starting with, or programmers, or technically proficient, even simple complex concepts like what UTXO is, how the transaction fees work, are very hard for people to understand. So from our point of view, yes, not your keys, not your coins, but a lot of people have a real problem holding on to their coins because they fall for phishing scams all the time. The campaigns, like the phishing campaigns, are basically ongoing all the time. And so our role, like as tool builders and educators, is for people to understand these very basic complex concepts that you need to keep those 12 or 24 words safe. We had questions about how the passphrase works. That's like the issue maybe sometimes is we were too fast with introducing new concepts into like self-custody, like passphrases, Shamir, then even conjoin, and there's a lot of features that people don't have a chance to understand if they don't understand the basic building stones like private keys and recovery seed. But on the point of the whole world not being able to own the UTXOs, that's a very basic fact of Bitcoin. So I don't know what is there to discuss in that. You need to either have some form of shared UTXO ownership or a custodian services. So what is your criticism there? So how should the next billion people own their Bitcoin? What's your take on that?
Well, are we at a state where we need to do that today? Do we have 1 billion people asking for Bitcoin ownership today? Or are we kind of giving away the things that make Bitcoin such an important technology before it's actually necessary to do so? We don't know what innovations are coming down the road, but it feels like in the rush, I would say, to create things on top of Bitcoin, we have, and here I actually want to highlight one of the reasons that Lightning has pushed so far into the layer 2 space is because you do still have ownership of your keys. You can exit onto the chain. Yes, there are issues. I mean, there are clearly issues, but it feels like the door is just opening wider and wider, almost on a monthly basis now, to say, well, we can give away a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that. But I'm not seeing the demand yet. I mean, Lightning is still in its infancy. So my answer to you is I don't really have a great answer to how, but I'm not sure that we need to answer the question today, and I'm not sure it's wise to be giving up too much ground in order to do so before it really needs to be answered. That's kind of where I'm at. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the reason I'm asking also for like the billion is it's not that maybe far away, because the estimate about like how many people own in some way some cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, is around 400 million now, and that's exchange accounts mostly. As I said, like Ledger sold 8 million, we more than 1 million. In total, it's like 10 to 15 million hardware wallets worldwide, but 400 million people that have some exposure to the price of Bitcoin or some other coins. So, and if we, like, it's getting more and more mainstream with the ETF, maybe with Argentina taking some steps towards opening up their system towards other currencies. And yeah, so like it's a question that is very real for the upcoming years, and we want to get those 400 million people to get them at least some form of self-custody, because we've seen what happened with FTX and others. And yeah, but like Bitcoin basically isn't prepared for that on the base layer. Lightning solves some of that. I hope stuff like FEDI solves some of that as well. But it's, I would say, like in the near future than we might imagine, because of this like 400 million people getting some exposure.
Okay, but you would agree it's not isn't a need we have today. I mean, we don't have, you know, the limitation on Lightning is that, you know, you need to rebalance your channels a few times. We are nowhere near the point where that is a limitation on us today. You know, you can rebalance a channel a few times a year, no issue. You can do thousands of transactions on that. We don't have to give up too much ground today. That's just the truth of it. I mean, yes, you might be right, but you know, who knows, right? We the thing is, we know something on the one side. We're giving something up, right? We know this. There's no debating it. We are giving up certain ideals in order to achieve scalability. We are balancing that with something we don't know, which is what is the demand for self-custody like in the future. Those ETF holders are not going to cash out into self-custody. People who think that they do are dreaming, in my view. Those are generally boomers with lots of money. They will like to stay on the inside money track versus the outside money track. They want to be able to cash out into their brokerage accounts. They want to be able to spend that money or reinvest it. They don't want to have to go through the additional hurdles of self-custody and then how do I get to an exchange and go through all of that exchange risk. They don't want any of that. So I'm not convinced that we do have this huge self-custody influx coming because of ETFs. You know, for me, it's not clear, and you know whether nation states adopt it or not, who knows? I mean, really. But I do know, on the other hand, that we are giving up certain ideals. I can see it. I can see the Bitcoin community moving over time, and it leaves me feeling uncomfortable, if I'm honest.
So basically, what you're saying is we're prioritizing mass adoption at the expense of losing what Bitcoin is and what it was made for. Like that's the point.
Thank you for saying it.
Yeah. So yeah, I see it as well. I mean, we're putting mass adoption on top of we're losing what Bitcoin is, self-custody and peer-to-peer, and
actually the ability to, you know, we were talking just before this. One of the things that Taproot was meant to have was this cross-input signature aggregation, right? And that was basically would reduce the size of a transaction by aggregating the signatures in it. And one of the interesting properties of that is that you get to have coin joins which are cheaper than a normal transaction, because you then get to share your transaction fees with other people who are then also want to transact, right? So it's actually an incentive to make Bitcoin more private, like a completely fee-based, out-of-band incentive to make Bitcoin more private. Now, because there's so much focus on scaling Bitcoin, any kind of soft fork other than a covenant soft fork is almost not even discussed anymore. We used to have like 3 soft forks. There was like the great cleanup of the consensus and blah, blah, blah. There was a few things a few years ago. Now you don't even see anyone talking about anything other than it's which covenant are we going to implement. It's not any other soft fork, right? Which means that cross-input signature aggregation, which would also be a soft fork, is off the table. I've never even seen it discussed. It's just not a thing. So what I am saying is the reason that people want covenants is because they want things like shared ownership of UTXOs as one of the major use cases. So again, to what you just said, I feel that in the search for mass adoption, we have discarded almost everything else. I mean, privacy is really important, and it just like what happened to that work? We know for sure we can do cross-input signature aggregation with Schnorr signatures. There's no doubt about it. We can do it, right? And presumably most people would want it. Who doesn't want Bitcoin to be more private? But no one's really working on it, promoting it, pushing it forward. That's just the truth of it.
Great topic. I love it. Thanks for bringing it up, first of all. I think what I would say to your question, do we have that need? I think clearly yes. And you can tell it by looking at the evolution of money that is happening right now. It is becoming digital. And digital payments and access to digital payments means participating in a global economy. And there are many, many people who are unbanked who can participate. Andreas Antonopoulos has talked about this years ago, about the unbanked and banking the unbanked. So reducing Bitcoin to a single value proposition of something, of a digital asset that you can self-custody or be private with is very narrow-minded. Bitcoin offers very many other value propositions to people. And not all of them, there are trade-offs, you get to keep. But some are more important for people in low-income countries, in countries where the traditional financial system is not really well built out. So that's like an upper funnel. And self-custody is a best practice of using Bitcoin. It's not a necessity. I think I disagree hardly with the people that say, if you're not holding your own keys, you're not using Bitcoin. You can have trust models and use Bitcoin. Liquid is a trust model. Fedi is a trust model. Uncle Jim is a trust model, even in the custodian version that you mentioned. And these things are perfectly human and social and normal. Now, we're always talking about the worst cases, and that's good that we are aware of them. But they're not the norm, and we should not make them bigger as they actually are. Because we can, like there's a fork in the road. We either go the CBDC route or we go the Bitcoin route. For digital payments, I think it's inevitable that they're coming. And people have a demand for them to economize in a global digital economy. And you can also look at other cryptocurrencies like Tether and how much they're picking up. They're trading at a premium in Turkey over dollars in a bank account. Unimaginable. It's crazy, but it's true. $85 billion market cap. And maybe Ollie also can talk about it. Like there's now Taproot assets coming because there's just a huge market demand for it. But Bitcoin can't serve it right now. And so that's what I'm throwing back to you as your question.
So there's just one point. I mean, thank you. That was a great answer, and I appreciate that point of view. There's one point I would disagree on. In general, we have seen that trust-based systems do degrade over time. That is the history of money. That is what it teaches us, that if we had a central authority that everyone trusted to issue good money in the past, we have seen how over enough time that does degrade. So if, for example, we had a general convergence that Liquid, I'm just picking Liquid here, was the right layer 2. It worked out well, everyone was using it, there were good apps for it. At what stage of nation state adoption does the pressure on those federated members become so great that things start to break down, and to the extent that they break down in the current fiat monetary systems that we see today? what we don't want to do is create a system that lasts for another whatever year. It's faster and faster, right? That's my concern, is that we end up there again, right? And then people just point at us and say, well, you didn't really do anything.
I have a point of view. So Cole, you said the whole point of Bitcoin is self-custody. But is that the whole point of Bitcoin? You know, if we had to give the number one reason why Bitcoin is important, I would argue it's neutral money. And in fact, if you look at the white paper, there's not much in it about self-custody. But brink of second bailout for banks implies neutral money. And you made the point in your opening comment, Craig, that the majority of the world's wealth. And for me, if you look at all these edge cases where trade-offs are made, whether it's Liquid or Wallet of Satoshi or what have you, at least currently, those are edge cases. And I personally don't foresee a scenario where the majority of the wealth stored in Bitcoin moves to those edge cases. And for me, that's actually the thing we have to protect, is, whatever the number is, 51% or 99%, has to be on-chain, self-custodied, and therefore neutral. So if the ETFs became 80% of the money, I would start to worry. Because actually at the end of the day, I think my full circle realization for Bitcoin is kind of where I started, and then I got distracted. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is 21 million. And everything else is in service of that. It's almost like that was the starting point. And then every piece of, I used to think, and still do, that the most beautiful thing about Bitcoin is the difficulty adjustment. But in the end of the day, that's a feature. The benefit is 21 million, and it's in service of that benefit. And so, is someone going to store their life savings on Wallet of Satoshi? I'd really hope not. Or maybe for their first few sats, maybe, yes. But as long as there's that facility to come back on chain, and that's where we have to get into covenants. I mean, right now, I'd probably prioritize privacy. But your point was, like, we're in a race against CBDCs, and that race isn't going to be decided on privacy. That race is going to be decided at the till for the customer. What is the easiest way to pay? And Bitcoin has at least got to be on par from a speed and cost and whatever perspective, because it comes with other benefits. But if it's more expensive or slower or what have you at the point of purchase, it's going to lose the CBDC, especially in the places where Bitcoin probably matters the least, but they also control the wealth, Europe, the West, etc., etc. No Swiss person is going to go to the till and wait for an on-chain transaction. They would laugh, And then my final point is that, it's 39 sats per VByte at the moment. For Africa, that's unaffordable. That's way too much money. I mean, that's more than the average daily earning for most Africans, just the transaction cost. And so, yes, if you can wait and if you're just rebalancing channels, it's okay. But actually, as a currency, it's just not an acceptable amount, and so the trade-offs have to be made. But my main point is that as long as the majority stays on-chain from a wealth perspective, I'm not worried, because then we protect the 21 million.
I'll just say quickly to that, if you say that the 21 million is the thing you're most worried about, are you, or the most important thing, what about the permissionless aspect of Bitcoin? Because are you prepared to give that up? And that's a question.
So I'm saying as long as the majority of the wealth can be self-custodied, is permissionless, etc., which is wildly still the case. I don't know how much Wallet of Satoshi is sitting with, but it's way less than 1%.
So, look, that's a valid point, but how do you protect that? How do you ensure that, for example, I'm just going to pick on Liquid again, maybe because there's no Liquid people in the room. What happens if 80% of the Bitcoin networks gets pegged to Liquid? What happens? And you can't prevent it. If Liquid becomes the best way to transact, it's cheaper, it's fast, there's just everything about it just works, everyone's used to it, and more Bitcoin starts flowing in there, what's going to stop that trend? And then you have 80% pegged in, and then you are sitting with a system which is not dramatically different from the system we have today.
I don't think it'll happen for two reasons. Liquid would break if that happened, and I don't think it even scale its own blockchain fast enough to facilitate that. But also, I don't think humans, when you're dealing with this much money, and by then call it $10 trillion market cap. If I was some oak with $1 million in Bitcoin, I'd think twice about where I'm going to send it, whether it's to Liquid or just my own other wallet. I'm going to use my common sense a little bit with I'm dealing with that amount of cash. And if you don't use your common sense, you kind of deserve to lose it. I don't foresee a world where those edge cases that have the trade-offs have enough value in them to manipulate the 21 million.
Maybe Liquid is like a little bit of a gray area. Maybe let's take a more extreme example, like a Bitcoin bank, which is a centralized entity regulated in a jurisdiction. They have a door that somebody can knock on, the government, right? With Liquid, like, it's a little bit scamming the regulator. We don't know who the functionaries are. They are jurisdictionally in different places. It's, let's take a Bitcoin bank like Wallet of Satoshi or Blink, right? So currently, that's the only way we can scale Bitcoin banks. To be on par with the payment convenience needs to compete with the traditional payment systems. They offer the same convenience. Nobody else does. Also Liquid does not. It has 1 minute block times, which is not bad, but it's fairly good. Lightning is the way to go. We have NFC payments, tap to pay, Lightning addresses, right? A lot of things that custodial services help us to win this, to come on par with the payment experience that we're used to, that many people are used to. Now, if there was only one, for example, Facebook, if they were a custodian, that would scare me to death, right? If David Marcus with his Lightspark sold a custodial solution and they implemented it in Instagram and Facebook Messenger and Facebook and WhatsApp, and they all had this custodial Lightning wallet, not blinded, single custodian, that would scare the fuck out of me. So I'm not for that. But if we had thousands of community banks, Bitcoin banks, built on an open source standard, okay, they are regulated in maybe Bitcoin friendly jurisdictions, they have a multi-sig behind, ideally geographically distributed across multiple jurisdictions, so even if someone comes knocking at their door, they can just say, okay, well, we just incorporate somewhere else. We're going to take our business somewhere else, and our customer funds will be protected, and no force you apply to us. Like obviously that's a similar system to how Liquid works, right? If you have a Bitcoin bank where 95% of the funds or of the deposits are custodied in a multisig, right? There's no better way to custody Bitcoin securely in a cold storage. And I don't see a future where suddenly all the jurisdictions in the world start cooperating. So there will always be jurisdictional arbitrage. And I see that with the current Bitcoin that we have as the only way to actually scale to billions. And otherwise, like Josef said, and that's the reason why there's so much talk about covenants, because Bitcoiners say, this is maybe not the best shot at the future that we want, like scaling with Bitcoin banks. Maybe there's an even better way that's more true to the Bitcoin that we want, where everyone can actually own their share of a UTXO and unilaterally exit without asking for permission, like ARC, like that, for example. Maybe there's other ideas. So that's, I think, my perception of why there's so much talk about this, because, yeah, we want self-custody for as many people as possible, but we also need to respond to the demand that, in my eyes, is clearly there in the market.
Yeah, but I think you bring a really valid point that, what we really want is censorship resistance, because, the thing is, like you say, well, custody is the only way to scale. I don't agree, because we've seen historically with fiat money that custody doesn't scale. That's why, like technical limits that disallows U.S. banks or European banks for every African citizen, or like citizens in African countries, to open bank accounts on their mobile phones. It's not technical limits, it's regulatory limits. And like you say, if there are just a few custodians, and I mean, how many banks do exist worldwide? There are a few thousand banks, but that's too little for regulatory pressure to not exist. And that's why it's super important that we allow everyone to have self-custody if needed, because else it will not scale to the billions that you are speaking to. It will only scale to the people that are part of the financial system currently. That's my view of it. And FEDI could potentially help where you have community banks, but the problem is also that might be too few of those that can actually, there will be regulatory pressure if you actually, basically have too few alternatives. And the same with covenants, like say the fees are $100 per transaction. So say you are in ARC, for example, and you need to unilaterally exit through the ARC. You need to publish like 10 transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain in order to unilaterally exit. So I mean, that doesn't really work either. So yeah, it's a complicated question with like lots of nuances, and I don't know if any of us have the real answer. But yeah, I don't think custodianship is the way to scale, because that will not scale more than the current financial system. And I think, yeah, that's my main point, I guess.
Does it need to? None of us are walking around with a safe in our pockets. We have a wallet, and you're quite likely in this country to have it removed from your person.
You want to comment on
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, for someone who lives in a township in South Africa, it is much safer to have Bitcoin on wallet of Satoshi on your phone than money in your wallet in your pocket. So already you're getting a better deal. And the probability of wallet of Satoshi rugging you is much lower than the guy next door to you.
Yeah, but I think Craig's main point is like, if Bitcoin became the dominant financial system in the world, will wallet of Satoshi get enough pressure that they can allow people in the townships to have a wallet? And I think the answer to that is probably no. They will get so much regulatory pressure that will not be possible for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's my concern. We're obviously talking about a spectrum here between individual ownership, and if we go all the way to the other end of the scale, CBDC, one owner, the Fed, right? The Fed owns everything. You all have an account with the Fed. I'm just using an extreme example here. The spectrum is what we have to think about, right? And I think where the differing opinions around this room are is, where on the spectrum do we think is a safe point, right? Where do we think we can still retain the properties of being permissionless, of having a limited supply in our currency? At what point in the spectrum do those principles still hold, or at what point in the supply do they get eroded like they are in the fiat world today? And that's, I think, the key point, right? We don't know the answer to that. I mean, we can have opinions, but we don't know the answer to that. I am concerned that anything beyond, say 100 to 1,000 people starts to get to the point where, to your point, regulatory pressure starts to come in. And that's largely what we have today, right? What we don't want to do is repeat the system of today. Now, what we have working against us is the convenience factor that institutions can provide. If you have a business model, and like Wallet of Satoshi has, right, they provide a good product, they have a business model, they presumably make money out of it, but already you are starting to see the first regulatory pressure. We all know that they have been removed from the US App Store. They didn't want to do that. That's because they had some lawyers who told them to do it, right? And in my view, that's going to happen. I don't think that they will last as a business more than a few years. I think that there will be regulatory pressure all around the world for holding and transacting, because that's what states want to control. So if you if you look at them as a model, I don't think that that's going to be a successful model. I do think it is possible to have successful models. I don't think we are doomed to never scale Bitcoin. I hope that there will be models in the middle, but I am concerned that unless we talk about at what level do we start to lose the properties, at what point do we start to risk centralization of this thing, unless we start talking about that and becoming aware of it as a community, then I think we are going to reenact the past. That is my concern.
Well, it sounds like it's a catch-22, right? I'm not really sure like where I am, because I see both sides. Because first of all, it's a race. If we had all the time in the world, then it's one thing, right? But the CBDCs are here, and you have it like the yuan is here, and it's powerful. You know, it can do smart contracts, and they're upgrading it all the time, and it's gonna be super easy to use, and it's gonna be on every app, and that's the only thing you can use. You don't have another. So it's one of those where, like, if we had more time, then maybe we could be more careful about it. But at the same time, we have to be prepared when that billion comes, whether it comes tomorrow or whether it comes 10 years from now. Because if you're not, and then you miss that wave, then you're fucked. You're screwed, because the CBDCs are gonna make a fool out of you. You know, they're gonna be like, look, it doesn't work. You know, it doesn't scale, and now right after that, they're like, oh, and guess what? We're really not the CBDC. This one does work. This one does complete your transaction when you scan the barcode at the thing in less than 1 second. And if we miss that, then that could be a serious problem.
Yeah, look, I'm not convinced that the CBDC threat it shouldn't be overstated in my view. We have extremely performant fiat payment networks today, right? When people say they are scared about the CBDC, it's more about the additional controls that a CBDC can put into our lives, like when can I spend it, where can I spend it, can it be airdropped, all of those those are the major changes, right, to the payment network. It's not whether the payment works or not. That happens today. If you are part of that payment system, it works today, right? So, for me, I don't think we should overstate that, because there is a basic continuity to a long history here we have between people wanting to control and people fighting back against that control. And that has existed throughout time, right? And the more control that you put onto people, the more they tend to fight back, because they don't want to be controlled. So, I don't think we should say that if a CBDC gets launched and is received well, that the fight is over. I think that the fight will go on. It's not like we're just all going to say, oh, well, fuck it, that was it, So I just caution against rushing into things and saying, well, we've run out of time. We had 10 years, we had 15 years, it's over. We should now just implement the first thing that people throw at us. I think that that's a dangerous thought. We should be careful. We should build money that is resistant to state capture. And we shouldn't rush into things because CBDCs are a threat on the horizon. I don't know if we're out of time. Are we?
Yeah, the speaker's not arrived yet, so you have about 5 more minutes.
Okay. Josef, do you want to have a chat?
Yeah, so at least one comment. So like sometimes Bitcoiners talk about mass adoption as if it's something we are sort of pushing on the world, and that we need to sort of explain to people why they should use Bitcoin. I think it's the other way around. The mass adoption is coming no matter what we do or say, basically, because Bitcoin simply works as a viable alternative to monetary systems that are failing at an accelerating rate. So yes, it would be nice to have more time, but I don't think we have it. Like it is happening at an accelerating pace, whether we like it or not. And I'm glad we have the full spectrum of solutions. We have hardware wallets for self-custody if you can afford it, if it makes sense for you to have on-chain UTXOs, at least 1 million sets. Nothing like less makes that much sense. I'm glad we have like Bitcoin banks. I'm even glad we have like exchanges like FTX that failed and showed that this is not the way to go. It was expensive for some people. So I'm even glad like we have ETFs because as you said, the typical customer of the ETF isn't going to withdraw it into self-custody, but what ETFs serve for is showing the rest of the world that Bitcoin is legitimate. Like, unfortunately, a lot of people still need that stamp of approval, and it's much harder for the critics of Bitcoin to argue that Bitcoin is simply a scam, like a pyramid scheme or something, if you have ETFs on the Wall Street trading. So I believe the mass adoption is coming no matter what we think or do or say, and we just need to do our best to prepare for that as best as possible.
Thanks, everyone.